We can begin now. Firstly, I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon to distinguished guests and participants. I hope that your families and yourselves are safe and well. My name is Emily McQualter and I work for the Energy Efficiency Division of the IEA, and I coordinate the IEA's energy efficiency activities in Southeast Asia. And I have the pleasure today of welcoming you all to the webinar, and I'd like to thank you all for attending. We work to try and establish really try to establish a community of energy efficiency practitioners in Southeast Asia and hold webinars and workshops on a regular basis. So I'd like to encourage you to contact us if there's a topic of interest that you would like to hear more about, because we'd be very happy to speak to you more about it or to hold a webinar or workshop on these topics. So we have a very interesting webinar lined up for you today on energy efficiency in the time of Covid-19, action on transport, urban infrastructure and impacts to support social and economic recovery in Indonesia. So before I introduce the session, I just wanted to go over some basic housekeeping. Next slide please, Etienne. So this webinar will be held in English and Bahasa Indonesia. If you have the latest version of Zoom, you can hear the translation in Bahasa Indonesia or English, and all you have to do is click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please, Etienne. So we're also recording this webinar, so everything will appear online on the IEA webpage. So we'll have the slides and the video recording in Bahasa Indonesia and English on our webpage. And we'll send an email shortly to let everyone know when that's available. If you would like to ask questions of the panelists, please do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. So now the most important part of today, to introduce the panelists. So I have the privilege of doing this, and so I'd first like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Alison Priedmore. Alison is our transport expert and is working closely with the government of Indonesia on a number of transport-related projects, and she can introduce herself more. But Alison is going to present today on some of our research and also moderate the session. Following Alison's presentation, we have a presentation from Ibu Fayela Sufa. And Ibu Sufa is currently the ITDP, Institute of Transportation and Development, Southeast Asia Director. Ibu Fayela holds a master's degree in transport planning and engineering from the University of Leeds, UK, and a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from Indonesia's Gajah Mada University. Sorry about my pronunciation. She has been working directly in around 10 countries and over 15 cities, giving technical assistance on sustainable urban mobility, mainly promoting non-motorized transportation, public transportation innovations, policies, and building strong relationships with a variety of stakeholders, including stakeholders from government, private sector, international finance institutions, and UN agencies. The next speaker is Pak Mazde Arufi. He is currently the Secretary of the Jakarta Transport Agency and a member of the Jakarta Province Transport Board. He earned his master's degree in Transportation Systems and Techniques from Gajah Mada University in 2002. The next speaker is Pak Junadi Nelman Patandang. He is currently head of Road Equipment Division of the Jakarta Public Works Agency since January 2020. He received his master's degree in administration from Krishnadwipaya University, apologies. So you can see that we have an excellent panel of experts here today who are going to give us a really good insight into transport policy in Indonesia. So next slide, please. So I just put this slide in here just to show you some recent resources that we have available on our website and that might be of interest to you. So please feel free to download them. You can from the slide deck or from our website directly. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Alison to introduce herself and to start her presentation. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emily. Hello, as Emily mentioned, I'm Dr. Alison Pridmore and I'm the Transport Lead in the International Energy Agency's Energy Efficiency Division. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this webinar on energy efficiency in the time of COVID-19, which is looking at transport urban infrastructure action and impacts in Indonesia in the context of social and economic recovery. As Emily's really highlighted, we've got an excellent array of speakers and a really packed agenda today. There's going to be the opportunity to ask questions throughout, and then please use the chat function provided. So we have hopefully 15-20 minutes at the end to respond to your questions. So in terms of the agenda, really we're going to be moving from the global to the regional to the city level, from written plans. So for example, the sustainable recovery is kind of a written plan. The energy efficiency report is data analysis, to on the ground action, which the panelists are going to be speaking to. And then for me, this is incredibly complementary, showcasing real world examples, best practice learnings, data collection from on the ground. Action really facilitates, facilitates things being implemented in the longer term. In terms of the global, I'm going to start providing a brief overview of some of the work that the International Energy Agency has been taking on urban infrastructure and related aspects like public transport use, walking and cycling uptake. And this is going to be followed by our excellent panelists with Fairless working to the more regional level, and then our two more local Jakarta-based examples. So globally, we know, and again, our panelists are going to be talking to this as well, COVID-19 has led to large-scale changes in urban transport activity. Public transport use has typically declined dramatically, while cycling, walking and car use has been less impacted and has often increased. And the impact of these changes have been considered in our just launched, very recently launched 2020 Energy Efficiency Report. Etienne, can you move to the next slide, but I might jump back in a bit as well. And this report really looks at urban mobility, energy intensity, and the impacts of COVID-19. I mean, this is very much a global graph, and again, I think our speakers will be referring to this kind of patterns before, but the crisis has been changing transport behaviours. This graph is looking at trip request information for commutes, so basically typically Monday to Friday, and it's sort of highlighting the impacts on public transport and the lesser impacts on walking and driving. Etienne, can you go back a slide? Brilliant. And this builds on work that colleagues undertook earlier in the year. And this initial work looked at some of the snapshot of initial changes in transport behaviour during the COVID-19 crisis. Etienne, can you go forward 2 slides? Brilliant. And this initial work looked at kind of, I suppose, initial consumer reactions to the crisis. But it also looked at case study examples where large-scale transport impacts had happened previously, and it had the case study example of London, where the bombings in 2005 had led to a kind of initial shift away from public transport, but instead of that going to car use, cycle use increased and has continued to increase over time. And that's due to a function of measures, including increasing levels of cycle infrastructure, as well as the impacts of congestion charging. And I know our participants are going to be looking at some of these aspects in the more regional context as well. So I think we are saying here that there's opportunities when the behaviour change as a response to crises could be considered more positive in terms of cycle use to sort of access those opportunities in the longer term. Etienne, next slide, please. So, and this kind of theme of transport infrastructure action, investment in urban infrastructure, underpinned work undertaken earlier this year, where the International Energy Agency, in collaboration with the IMF, produced a sustainable recovery plan for actions that can be taken over the next 3 years. And this plan really focused on cost-effective measures and examined a range of sectors, not just transport, it examined industry and buildings as well. The transport section recognised the importance of action of new vehicles, expansion of high-speed rail infrastructure, and really a focus of today is the role of improving urban infrastructure. In total for the plan, 1 trillion would be spent annually, of this 270 billion would be for the transport sector and 26 billion for urban infrastructure. And this 26 billion covers walk and cycle and investment in electric vehicle charging. Urban infrastructure was seen to offer a number of opportunities, timeliness, and again, I know our participants, panelists could be speaking to this afternoon, in terms of recognising the need for socially distanced measures and opportunities for walk and cycle. Benefits, we've already talked about air quality in Jakarta, and I think that will come through as well. Shorter payback periods in terms of people's investment, for example, in cycles. And another key factor was the near-term shovel-ready nature of the jobs provided, that actually the jobs could be implemented straight away. Etienne, next slide, please. And this graphic captures that kind of the job creation opportunities. So, for example, for walk and cycle infrastructure, it is estimated that around 175,000 jobs per year globally could be created. And both walk and cycle infrastructure have large job multiplier levels. And this, where countries are in kind of this investment, this kind of action, is also captured in the Energy Efficiency 2020 report. But I really think this is kind of underpinning some of the discussion we're having today of what's going on the ground, what's working, what isn't working, what impacts can be already being seen, and the expectations of action going forward. So with that kind of warm up, I'm very pleased now to hand over to Ibu Sufa to introduce her kind of more regional perspective.
Thank you, Alison. Actually, I will deliver my presentation in Bahasa because I see the attendees here mostly is Indonesian. So yeah, I'll switch to Bahasa. Selamat siang, Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation today is about the impact of COVID-19 on mobility, on the importance of implementing sustainable transportation. Perhaps we may also continue on from Mr. Mazda's presentation and Mr. Junaidi's presentation. Next. During the pandemic, there are 3 things that we need to avoid, and that is the 3C, according to the World Health Organization. And that is crowded places or places where you can find a lot of people around, and then close contact settings where people are stand closely together, or especially where people have close range conversations among families. And the third is in confined and enclosed spaces. So the 3 principles are the principles that we need to avoid during the pandemic. With the 3 things that we need to avoid, we are able to see the impact it has on mobility. And this is something that I will discuss. Next. During the pandemic, we need to avoid unnecessary. The first one is to avoid unnecessary travel, because when we are traveling, we're suggested to use the public transportation or private vehicles. But during the pandemic, because the capacity of the public transport have been reduced and the fact that we use private vehicles more often, we're able to avoid congestion, and therefore we suggest that we avoid unnecessary travel. And there's also a policy on working from home, and then limitation to operational hours for businesses. And the third one is to avoid physical interactions, especially when we are traveling. When we are traveling, there are limitations to the capacities in using private vehicles or public transportations. And this is to implement the physical distancing policy. And we're also obligated to wear face masks. And when we are on public transportation, we must refrain from speaking or talking. Next. And then there's shift. When we have to travel, we need to understand what it is that we need to do. Actually, we want to see a shift in the choices of the mode of transportation from public transportation and private vehicles to something that is more environmentally friendly, such as bicycles, and something that is more inclusive and sustainable. If we see the increase in the number of bikers or bicycle users in Jakarta in November 2019, I'm sorry, this year. So there is an increase in the number of bikers up to 1,000% in several locations in Jakarta, such as in Dukuh Atas. In many countries, this trend is also the same. In New York, there's a 50% increase. In Scotland, Philadelphia, Bogota, and Beijing. In addition to the number, there's also an increase in the kilometer or distance. Next. Why do we use the term shift? Because we do not want our city to be like this. Because of our reluctance to use public transportation, because fear of transmission and other factors. Therefore, we tend to use private vehicles such as motorcycles or cars. And if this happens, our city will be congested, and this will create greater problems for our city, such as air pollution, accidents, and pollution is more dangerous than COVID-19 itself. Next. This is an illustration of why we need to move to non-motorized transportation, because we are reducing the capacity of our public transportation services. Are we going to use our own vehicles, where not everybody are able or can afford their own cars? So that means not everybody has access to private vehicles, and this leads to gridlock and an increased number of motorcycles. The most feasible is to walk short distances or by riding a bicycle for longer distances. And this is a flexible mode of transportation and that can be used within certain physical distances. It is also environmentally friendly and it is a mode of transportation that is sustainable because this can assist in reducing the energy crisis and other crises. And this also complement. So we also try to complement this by providing special lanes for non-motorized vehicles. And we can see this happening in developing cities. And we can see here that the pedestrian lanes are there, but there are no bicycle lanes. And that is the difference between the developing cities and other cities. Next. The third is to improve. This is how we're able to be innovative during the pandemic. The first one is increased public transportation. So this is a priority for the essential workers and also to implement the health protocols and then sterilization in the public buses, such as the busway, and then integration of scheduling and real-time information. The second one is facilities for pedestrians and public spaces, because we know that we need to follow the physical distancing. Therefore, we need pedestrian lanes and public spaces. So we have the pop-up pedestrian path, and this we can see in Jakarta along Sudirman and Tamrin. And because we know that there are a lot of pedestrians in the area. And then there's also safe open street and also to increase the number of public spaces. And the third one is bicycle facilities. And this is also responded by several other cities in Indonesia and other cities in Southeast Asia. And the first thing is by implementing the pop-up bike lane, and then as an alternative, there's also bike sharing to replace the motorcycles, and then bicycle parking facilities, and perhaps also bike on board. In addition to that, to encourage or to limit the use of private vehicles, we have demand management, and that is by implementing the odd and even number policy in Jakarta, and then there's the ERP, electronic road pricing, and then employer-based trip reduction, and then in transforming the parking spaces as public spaces, such as for cafes or small stalls. And then there's also management of parking fares and parking transaction that is non-physical in nature. Next. Actually, the improvement that we need to do at this time is not only to help the health protocol. We need to encourage people to move to public transportation. And one of the example is this. In Jakarta, people use public transportation also require conveniences and comfort, just like when they are using their own vehicles. And there needs to be an integration among modes of transportation. So in the bottom, there's is a station, and the Transjakarta station at the bottom, and then in the middle, there is the common area, which is an integration of BRT and LRT. And not only that, the access becomes extremely important for pedestrians and for public transportation users. there needs to be wider pedestrian and direct access to the stations. Next. One other improvement is by electrification of the Transjakarta buses. So it's time to make public transportation as a pioneer to reduce pollution in our cities, because the public transportation, the kilometers that they use from our house to the office, for example, is about 10 kilometers. So if you go back and forth, that's about 20 to 30 kilos. But public transportation, they can run for hundreds of kilometers. For Transjakarta alone, it can be about 200 kilometers per day. So this is something that we need to pay attention to. So by electrifying the public transportation, we can become a pioneer in developing an electrification ecosystem in our public transportation. And in the future, motorcycles in Indonesia and other countries in Southeast Asia can dominate the roads. So two-wheel motorcycles can be reduced by 79%. And this is an example of the plan for electrifying the Transjakarta buses in 2020. Next. Another improvement is by allocating the routes for the private transportation, and this is in Jalan Kendal. This was a traffic route, but it was closed by the provincial government of DKI Jakarta and has been transformed as a pedestrian crossing. And this is because the number of pedestrians are quite large in numbers, up to the thousands. And a lot of them pass through here. And this is a key area as well, because not far from here is the commuter line, and then there's the airport train, and it is also close to the MRT and the Transjakarta station. And this is in a central area, in the CBD area. Next. I have explained that there is an increase in the number of bike users, and there's also an intervention from the government to implement a pop-up bike lane. But what is needed by the bikers are not only that, they need bicycle lanes that are safe, that are protected, because the bikers are not only for the professional or expert bikers, and we know that there are cities for 8 to 18 years old, so we need to make sure that everyone can bike safely. So improvement for bicycle lanes is necessary. Next. This is another improvement to shift or to move to modes of transportation that is environmentally friendly. We all know that when we use the train and we get off in several stations in Jakarta, we're already greeted by all these motorcycle taxis. They are one of the mode of transportation that also results in air pollution. So we need transportation that is environmentally friendly, and that is by using bicycles and walking. Next. And the last one, to limit the use of private vehicles. The use of private vehicles itself must be limited. The comfort for people using private vehicles and to get them from door to door needs more encouragement so that they're willing to move to public transportation. All the facilities have been provided. The mode and last mile facilities have been made well so that the citizens are willing to move to other modes of transportation that are more sustainable. And there are several steps to do this. And the most important is parking. This is one of the tools that is most important. If we look at the situation today, we can see that there are a lot of parking places. It's like obligatory for us to provide parking spaces when it is not the obligation of the government to provide parking spaces. So parking management is a key element. By reducing the number of parking areas, and another one is to increase the parking fare. And second one is electronic road pricing and low emission zone. So limiting a certain area to transportation modes that are environmentally friendly, such as cycling or walking, or those other vehicles with zero emissions. What's also important is the spatial planning. When the urban development is sprawling in nature, then the need for mobility and need for transportation becomes extremely important. But if urban planning can be developed in a more compact and dense nature, then everything can be fulfilled within a certain area. So we do not need to use our private vehicles, or we do not need to use public transportation. We can walk to school, we can walk to work, or we can walk to the shops to buy our daily needs.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to thank you. It's excellent.
This is my last presentation. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And I really think it spoke to the importance of a package of measures and the need to kind of to reduce certain behaviours in order to facilitate more positive behaviour. You spoke excellently to that. I'd now like to hand over to Pak Arufi, who's going to be giving us a more local perspective. Thank you very much, Pak Arufi.
Baik, terima kasih. Saya Mas Arofi dari.
Thank you very much. I am Masdes Arofi, the Secretary of the Jakarta Transportation. And what we are about to present here during this auspicious occasion, and this is what has been conducted by the Jakarta city government for the development of infrastructure that relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an illustration that a couple of years back, up until year 2019, the transportation system in Jakarta, we can see that there are still a number of congested areas, a lot of traffic jams. But the city government of Jakarta has tried to increase their participation for the sharing of modes of transportation, and the portion for public transportation is only 21.7%, and that's for the mode share of public transport user. and the rest are still using personal vehicles, using their cars or motorcycles. And of course, this can create a traffic congestion, and which leads to an economic loss of time, during traveling, and also not good for our health. As has been mentioned and understood by us, that the public transportation is very much in need. 75% of the emission is coming from the vehicles, the motorcycles. So based on one of the conditions that we face today, we have faced a lot of traffic jams and the third worst traffic in the world based on one of an agency that rates us. Next, please. Of course, the problems that we face in big cities and developing countries. So the Jakarta City Provincial Government at this time, they have drafted a new scheme for transportation. You can see here, we have a scale of priorities for the development on Jakarta transportation for the future, whereby the reform is our participation towards the pedestrians. So we do pedestrianization and has been developing well. In this case, of course, physically, the infrastructure has changed and we have a lot of pavements and also a lot of pedestrian path. And this will be later discussed from the Jakarta Public Works Agency, because based on the execution of the program that is responsible for pedestrian lane and zebra cross is under the hand of the Jakarta Public Works Agency. And to develop vehicles that is environmentally friendly vehicles, non-motorized vehicles. So we are facing transportation that a lot of people are using their bicycles, using their private bikes individually, and we also have bikes to share. And for environmentally friendly vehicles, as I have already mentioned by Ibu Faila Sufa, the government of Jakarta and also the regional state-owned enterprises, we have tried to use an electrified buses in Jakarta, and we hope that the trial will be successful. And we plan that we are going to conduct cooperation with a number of parties to add a number of the fleet in terms of electrified vehicles, like the white vehicle here on the picture or on the slide. The next priority is for public transportation as a whole, meaning MRT, LRT, as well as using the roads with the classifications, starting from buses, maxi buses, medium bus, and small-scale buses. And lastly, private transportation. So this is a reform that we have been doing in the city of Jakarta. In the past, the tendency is we try to develop the roads. Now we prioritize to develop transportation that is environmentally friendly without emissions. Next. In relation to the issue that we are discussing at this time, COVID-19 cases in Jakarta, we are also still very concerned with the situation. Up till today in Jakarta, we have reached 154,000, more than 154,000 cases only in Jakarta alone. Meanwhile, the number of new cases, it continues to increase. And in the last 2 weeks, the average rate of cases per day in Jakarta is around 1,200 cases of positive cases in Jakarta. This is a serious concern by the government of Jakarta, and this includes public transportation that needs to be adaptive to the situation. Next. Next is what we have conducted by the city of Jakarta to try and see the trend of COVID-19, because it is continuing to increase since the beginning of March and April. We have conducted a large-scale social restriction policy for all the activities in Jakarta, PSBB. We have gone through a number of phases, and of course, this is in line with the efforts of implementing the policy itself with flexibility. We are now at the transition period, and this is the second transition since the 12th of October until now. Next. And what has been regulated for transportation purposes? For the large-scale social restriction policy, as I have mentioned, there are 3 areas, 3 sectors that we need to take control of. One is to regulate public transport with maximum capacity, maximum up to 50%. Operating hours, we also limit the operating hours from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m. for all modes of transportation, MRT, LRT, and also water transportation. We have the 1,000 islands near Jakarta, and so we need to have water transportation. And then we also apply this to the motorcycle taxis or ojek online, and this is also for the public. We ask the public to use their facial mask and then to provide hand sanitizers, and then you are not allowed to operate in areas that is still categorized as red zone, and you need to be equipped with all the supporting equipment. And we ask all the operators of transportation to also apply control of their vehicles, geofencing, so that when they meet, they don't get orders for the geofencing at the red zone. And we have also mentioned that we talk about the priorities for bicycle use and walking. And we also mandated all the people, the offices, shopping centers, that they must provide 10% of their parking spaces that they have for bicycles, and it should be close to the main gate of the shopping centers or offices. We also provide shower facilities for the cyclists, and this is our effort so that people will continue to use bikes and we give them easy conveniences. We also have a number of provisions at the stop stations, terminals, sports piers, and airports. And to the people who are using the transportation, they also need to follow the health protocols and use all the necessary equipment when using their private vehicles. And we also would like everybody to also be disinfected by means of transportation before and after use, and use the provision of PPE. Next, please. Next.
Just
This is a few illustrations.
5 more minutes. 5 more minutes.
These are a few examples of the commitment from the Jakarta city government to have sidewalks so people can walk nicely, and zebra crossings for people who likes to walk or pedestrians. And we also have facilities for those who are going to use the pedestrians in areas that are very much maintained. Next. This is our support for bicycle users. We only have around 63 kilometers at this time for bicycle users, but we are going to try and increase the number of kilometers in Jakarta. This is the plan for developing the number of fleets for electrified buses that is going to be conducted by Transjakarta under the city government of Jakarta's control. Next. Our big program is integration under Jaklinggo Transport Integration Scheme. Everything must be connected. And also for payment system, we are going to interconnect all the system of payment for the buses, the trains, and the modes of transportations. And the data and information and the infrastructure must be connected as well by the users of the public transportation so that they can move flexibly. Next, a seamless public transit connection. Next. This is a picture of the mode of public transportation in the areas of transit connections before and after. It was once unregulated, now it's very fancy and nice, and you can see that the infrastructure is much better, and it's giving the people who are using the facilities a very nice way of using the roads. Next. In addition to this, of course, the government has also conducted a collaborative action with the communities. And this is, of course, we work together with ITDP team. We conduct assistance to make wayfinding signage, socialization of transportation in the sub-districts up until the kampongs areas. And we have a program, cycling-friendly activities that we have introduced all the people since early childhood to use bicycles for modes of transportation. Next. Lastly, from a number of efforts that have been conducted by the Jakarta city government, we have achieved a number of points up till this time to increase the mobility for the city residents. Up until 1.5 million passengers per day can also use the public transportation. We give them headway 5 minutes before peak hour and 10 minutes off peak hour. Improve access and safety of pedestrians and cyclists continue to increase every morning. Hundreds of people goes to the corridors using their bikes. In the past, it's very empty, but now people are using their bicycles to do their trips and daily movements. And lastly, we give transport contribution to GHG reduction and air pollution. By using the public transport, we can lessen 78,016 tons of CO2. And from MRT, we can reduce more than 6,000 tons of CO2 per year. And also for the improvement in air quality, we can decrease the PM2.5 concentration by 40%. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Arifi. Yeah, again, as Viola, I think you really spoke to the need for a package of measures. And I think you really kind of emphasized for me how, for example, to make cycling more attractive, you gave it priority in terms of access to businesses and shops. You embedded cycling through cycling training at a young age, and you also sort of reached out to the community in terms of sort of getting the community on board. So I think it tied in excellently with the earlier presentation and the sort of the key themes that are emerging today. I'd now like to hand over to Pak Patadung to provide more details, sort of walking infrastructure elements. Thank you, Pak Patadung. If you'd like to start. I think you might be on mute.
Baik. Terima kasih atas kesempatan.
Thank you for the opportunity given to me. I am Junaidi Nelman Patandung from the Office of Public Works, and I would like to talk about Jakarta's response to COVID-19 in relation to the pedestrians. We need to understand that the vision of Jakarta's vision is to realize Jakarta as a sustainable city that is convenient to be lived in. And we need to develop this, especially in the development of the infrastructure. The engagement or involvement is by engaging the communities in providing ideas in the development of the infrastructure in the technical planning stage. And this can be used as an element that could be included into the design. Second, it is as the reference for the development of the sector, and that is for the midterm planning for 2017-2012 for the government of Jakarta to develop a strategic planning and also as a regional planning, including in spatial planning, and that is to maintain the use of the urban areas. The third is regulations relating to the pedestrian lanes in Jakarta that is just and that can support the business climate. And this relates to the policies and priorities that has been issued on pedestrians, especially in transit areas and the integration of various modes of transportation. And this is also carried out in regions with high economic growth, such as the development of pedestrian lanes in Kemang, in South Jakarta, and in Central Jakarta. Next. The third is on the regional strategic activity to improve the quality of the pedestrians. And this serves also as a reference for the development in Jakarta and also for works that requires coordination and collaboration between working units so that in the implementation there needs to be a commitment for a common target among the working units and the stakeholders in developing these pedestrian lanes. And then collaboration among the work units with the communities or the citizens to develop pedestrian lanes that could be used by the pedestrians. The budget for Jakarta for 2019 is from the regional budget amounting to 1.2 trillion and non-regional budget amounting to 360 billion. And this has been used for developments in Jalan Sudirman, Central Jakarta. Next. The basic idea is based on the strategic plan of the public works in 2019-2020. Prior to that, with an initial target of adding the width of the pedestrian lanes by 206 per year. and that 2,600 kilometers, or about 60 kilometers per year, while the strategic plan for the development of the pedestrian lane is 3,000 per year, and this would require 43 years to achieve. The roadmap for the development of the pedestrians for a length of 100 kilometers per year, and secondly, provision of goods and services for infrastructure 1 and 2, and also for road equipment and infrastructure and utility network. With this data for 2016, we're able to see that it is 154 square meters in 2017, and the amount is about 273 square meters, 2009 at 312 square kilometers. 2020 is 8,588 square meters, and this is because of the pandemic, or the COVID-19 pandemic. So the graph for this year is quite minimum, quite low. Okay. These are some of the documentations of the complete street revitalization, and this is in dividing the functions of the road completely, or to rearrange the roads based on the consistency of the lanes. And second is developing the lanes for the pedestrian, roads, bicycle, furniture and accessories. Development of a pedestrian lane in an inclusive way is in Kemang Raya, Cikini Raya, Salemba Raya. Next. Next. For the funding from a third party can be seen in Jalan Sudirman, Tamrin, Central Jakarta, and we also implement the complete street concept. Next. Other examples of non-regional budget is the cultural spot on Jalan Sudirman. The arrangement is aimed at improving the roads from vehicles to pedestrians, and to establish green spaces in the center of the cities, so that it provides opportunities for the citizens to conduct their activities in the public spaces. Next. In this pandemic situation, we from the provincial government of Jakarta have also facilitated several portable sinks. These sinks are placed in several regions, and it is complemented with soaps and tissue. And we can see the locations here of where these sinks are placed. Next. We can see here that there's the collaboration between the government of Jakarta and the private sector is the development of these infrastructures, such revitalizing the pedestrian bridges and also the pedestrian crossings. Next. As we know, investment for the regional budget for 2020 in handling the COVID is 850 billion to improve the roads and underpass through regular funding, and also for pedestrian lanes and pedestrian bridges. And the amount is 1.2 trillion, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the budget had been reduced to 15 billion is carried out in 6 locations, such as in the Senen Station area, Tanah Abang Station area, Jalan Jati Baru, Taman Jati Baru, Jalan Bendungan Walahar, Jalan Medan Merdeka Selatan, the National Monument. Next. To facilitate the uses of public transport, the Jakarta government have collaborated with several stakeholders to manage the several stations, and each have their own roles in the collaboration of rearranging or restructuring the stations. And the Office of Transportation leads this project. The first one is in the design of the station for the MRT, and we provide the lane, and PDM is the executor for developing it, and Jakarta government will provide the funding for developing or improving the station. And then we also accept inspirations and ideas for the development of the stations. Next. 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 The pedestrian lanes that have been implemented have been carried out in other countries, such as in Thailand. And this shows that our pedestrians have fulfilled the international standards, and we provide space for movement for pedestrians and also for the disabled. And the development of pedestrian lanes is not carried out without mature planning. And we need to look at the need for the pedestrians, the budget available, and the standards that must be of international standards. And the first one is the budget as the source of the funding. And the second is to develop the community. And the third is a good infrastructure. These prerequisites will require institutions that are capable. And it also requires people who are able to provide their aspirations, and then maintenance. And this needs to also be taken into consideration. Next, the aim of revitalizing the pedestrian lanes is to provide infrastructure for pedestrians and to connect people from their point A to point B, the destination, and to develop the public transportation. In this case, the bus stops or stations, and develop the accessibility and mobility of the movement of pedestrians. Thank you. From us, from the Office of Public Works.
Thank you very much. And I think for me, it really spoke to the importance of the design of the streets and the reference to kind of green infrastructure and the kind of space more broadly. I mean, I think you also touched upon, if I understood that correctly, about some of the kind of shorter term, financial challenges that COVID-19 kind of presented in terms of implementation for this year. Moving on now to the kind of question and answer session. And this is one really for all three of you. and it's to do with, you know, what advice would you give to other cities who were kind of starting to think about investment in electric vehicles, electric public transport, you know, investment in walk and cycle infrastructure. So I don't know, Patadong, if you wanted to answer that first, and then I'll move to Pakarufi. What advice would you give to others?
Baik. Jadi saran kami dari Bina Marga.
So from us, from the Jakarta Public Works Agency, the key for good infrastructure is how you identify the infrastructure to support a city that we dream of based on the plan for a 5-year development plan. The concept of planning and to make functions of roads ideally and complete, and to also facilitate for pedestrians in the spatial land area. And what is also important is the involvement or the collaboration of other institutions, agencies, communities, the users, and other related persons for the city planning itself, most especially for the pedestrian lanes. And I guess this is what I could convey at this time. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Pakarufi now, I don't know if you would come in from the sort of cycling perspective, the electric vehicle perspective.
Ya, dari perspektif kami,
from our perspective, from the Jakarta transportation in relations to the phenomenon of the COVID-19 pandemic, it forces us to change on how we conduct operational hours for public transportation. We can see there is a shift that are active riders to be changing to personal vehicles. It's not that we're changing our policies for people to use their private vehicles, but we need to develop modes of alternative transportation. And what is more general is the mode of transportation that is more private, like using your bikes or bicycles. So we have a commitment to continue our infrastructure so that we could adapt to the personal usage of the public vehicles for the private vehicles. But we also try to maintain the public transportation. For 2021 or next year, the government has a commitment and an obligation to bring services for MRT, LRT, and Transjakarta, 4 trillion rupiah. We will allocate this sum of money for the public transportation, which means there's going to be a development for public transportation. We will continue to be sustainable for public transportation. However, we will try to innovate by using personal vehicles. So the reform that we have conducted, it was also being touched by all the units in Jakarta transportation. We have to collaborate so that we are not going to be dependent by the local government expenditure. So we have started this by doing changes in the stations that we have. Last year, we have finished with 4 railway stations. Now, ongoing, we are trying to finalize 5 more railway stations, and this will continue for years to come. And we are not using the funds from the Jakarta city government. We are collaborating with other parties so that we would be able to have a mode of transportation for the public that is environmentally friendly for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pakarufi. Ibu Sufa, I'm going to ask one maybe more broadly, and that's to do with data collection. I don't know if you had any insights from ITDP's perspective about the importance of data collection at this time, and any discussions that have gone on. So kind of, sorry, we're running short of time, but I thought you'd have some sort of insights there, so important in that one.
Yeah, I think the data collection is very important part of the mobility itself. So there is a lot of things that we can use the benefit of data collections. For example, the benefit of data collection for the city leaders. So if we get the correct data, if we get the robust data, so the city leaders can use the data as for their policy basis. So they can define what kind of policies that are suitable for their city based on the data. And then for the planners and designers like us, so the data is very important for the planning and the planning design or a design techniques. Because without any robust data or it is very difficult for us to give recommendations that will benefit for others. And then for the citizen itself, we can use data collections as their user experience. And so the data collection can also be powerful as well to do the advocacy for the people. If we show the data, for example, like the impact of COVID on our health, or the impact of air pollution and our health, and then we show with the graph, and then it's easier for common people to understand. I think that also be powerful for advocacy as well.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And I don't know, Pak Arufi, Pak Atadung, you'd like to come in with any comments there on kind of data collection that's going on, or data collection plan going forward? In terms of kind of surveys on use of the cycle lanes, is there any kind of evidence being collected, or is any plans, or is it something that you'd be interested in, kind of sort of insights into going forward?
Yeah, maybe I can add it a bit.
Mungkin yang
Pak Junaidi,
perhaps the one who should answer is from the Jakarta Transportation, Pak Masdes Arufi. In relations to the data collection, of course, we are doing our work in parallel with the collection of data. But for innovation for transportation that is emerging at this time, our attention is for bikers. And we have just started this around 1 year ago for those who likes to cycle or bikers. But as has been mentioned by Sufa, every day we also measure and we contain those who are cycling in the main corridor, in the protocol lanes of Jakarta. We have a camera, a CCTV, and we contain all the data, and we are still collecting all the data for our effort to develop this type of system for the future. We only have 3 corridors for bikers. So we would like to have for the future a decree from the governor, so there will be more corridors for people to use their bicycles, 500 kilometers throughout Jakarta. In addition, from the Jakarta city government to also make networks that is environmentally friendly, like for the bikers. So next year, 60 billion will be allocated to make use of bicycle lanes. And the data that we have collected is still being recorded, is still being collected by one of our units. They're doing their surveillance for the data collection. And we have discussed this with ITDP for their inputs, which corridors are best used to be developed first. And lastly, we ask from the Jakarta Public Works Agency to execute the program.
Sebenarnya dari timnya Pak Junaidi.
From the team of Pak Junaidi, usually we have a survey for the pedestrians. Yes, Maybe you can tell us about this. Like there's a survey for the pedestrians before, after. Before you make the pedestrian lane, usually we count what is going to be the impact for developing that pedestrian lane and what's the best use for those who will be using that lane. Before we go into the planning step for development, prior to that, there is a survey by our friends on the field. They collect all the data on the field and they try to find out which one needs to be developed for a pedestrian lane. From a number of data that we have collected, we check and then we try to find which location is suitable to develop the pedestrian lane, because it is not just us doing this alone. We need to get inputs from the team of Ibu Faila, from ITDP as well, and also from our friends from Jakarta Transportation and also other parties. So we call it in our meetings, we throw this in the forum, and then at that time we try to make a decision. We try to discuss about the benefits and disadvantages, and then we select the right one. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I just want to say I think this has been an excellent session, interesting, informative, and really important. So yeah, my thanks again. And I think with any follow-up, we'll be in contact, because I think this has been really sort of key for Jakarta and Indonesia and the region more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you.